Would you invite a stranger into your home if he promised you eternal life? That question was written in blood on the cracked window of the Hollow Creek Inn the night the power went out. Most people in town dismissed it as vandalism. But Margaret Doyle, the inn's owner, knew better. She had seen the stranger who came with the fog. It was a Thursday evening when the red mist rolled in from the mountains, heavy and strange, thick enough to smear the headlights of cars and choke the night air with the metallic scent of rust. The street lamps flickered weakly through it, and that's when Margaret saw him. A tall, barefoot man standing motionless in the middle of the road, staring straight at her inn. His pale face glowed faintly beneath the lamp, his eyes reflecting light like polished glass. He didn't move, didn't speak. For a moment she thought he might be a lost traveler, someone who'd broken down on the road. But there was something about him, the stillness, the way the fog seemed to swirl around his feet like living smoke, that made her hesitate. When she finally stepped out onto the porch, clutching a flashlight, she called out nervously, "Sir, are you lost?" The man tilted his head slowly, almost like he was studying her. Then he smiled. Not a warm smile, but one that felt practiced, as if he had learned it from someone else long ago. "No, ma'am," he said softly. "I've finally come home." His voice was calm, too calm, carrying a kind of sadness that made her skin prickle. She didn't know why, but she felt an inexplicable pull to let him in. Against her better judgment, she opened the door. He signed the guest book in careful cursive under the name Lucian Vale. No address, no phone number, just a name that bled faintly on the page, as though the ink itself were alive. Margaret offered him dinner, but he declined. "I only eat late," he said, "when the moon is full." Something in his tone made her uneasy, but she nodded and handed him the key to room 7. When she glanced at the page again later that night, she noticed something strange. The line of ink beneath his name had dried dark red instead of black. The next morning, she found the kitchen door wide open. Every piece of meat, every bit of food from the refrigerator was gone. A trail of muddy footprints led down the hallway toward room 7. But when she knocked, Lucien's voice floated from the other side, calm, gentle, almost musical. "Please," he said, "I'm resting." And then silence. Word spread quickly through Hollow Creek. It was a small town. Gossip moved faster than the fog. Deputy Alan Price claimed he'd seen Lucian walking barefoot through the old cemetery at 2 in the morning. A local boy swore he spotted him in the woods drinking rainwater off the leaves. And Father O'Malley, the priest, said, Lucian came into the church one evening and stood before the altar for nearly an hour. But when the priest looked in the reflection of the brass cross, the man wasn't there. Still, no one dared confront him. He was too quiet, too polite, and somehow too unsettling. Then came the killings. It began with a stray dog found by the river, its body pale and shriveled, as if something had drained it from within. The next day, a deer was discovered the same way. And then a girl, 17-year-old Ellie Barnes, disappeared after her night shift at the diner. Her phone was found near the woods, the last picture she took showing a faint red mist and 2 glowing eyes behind her. The town descended into fear. Doors were bolted, lights stayed on all night, and whispers filled every corner. But through it all, room 7 at the inn remained occupied. Lucian Vale had not left. Margaret began to watch him closely. One night, as a storm rattled the windows and thunder rolled across the valley, she heard a strange humming from his room, soft, rhythmic, like a chant. She crept to the door and pressed her ear against it. The sound wasn't music. It was ancient. When she finally turned the knob, the door creaked open just enough for her to see inside. Lucian stood shirtless before a cracked mirror, his skin covered in scars shaped like symbols. Circles, crosses, and runes that shimmered faintly under candlelight. He was speaking in a language she didn't recognize, holding a silver locket between his fingers. When she gasped, he turned toward her. His eyes glowed a deep crimson, and his expression was neither angry nor surprised, only sorrowful. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "You shouldn't see this yet." She fled down the stairs, trembling. The phone lines were dead, the storm roaring outside. And as she glanced through the window, lightning split the sky, and for one split second she saw him again, standing beneath the oak tree, drenched in rain, smiling up at her. Then he was gone. The next morning, Sheriff Daniel Crowley arrived. He was a broad man with tired eyes and no patience for ghost stories. But Ellie's disappearance had shaken even him. "Margaret," he said, "I want to see the man in room 7. She warned him not to. "He's not what he seems," she whispered. Crowley ignored her and knocked on the door. No response. He kicked it open. The room was empty, completely. The sheets untouched, the window slightly open. On the nightstand sat a single folded note that read, "Do not fear the darkness, fear the ones who call it their friend." Beneath it was a small silver ring engraved with the initials EB. That night, a search party followed a faint trail of blood leading from behind the inn into the woods. The deeper they went, the thicker the red fog became. It was cold enough to see their breath. The trail ended at an old limestone cave, a relic from the mining days, where they found bones. Dozens of them arranged in spirals, circles, patterns too deliberate to be random. At the center was a stone altar streaked with fresh blood, and carved into the wall were words that made even the sheriff's voice shake as he read them aloud. "The crimson guest comes not to feed but to remember." That night the wind howled over Hollow Creek. The fog pressed against windows like a living thing. Margaret locked herself inside the inn, clutching a candle, praying under her breath. Sometime after midnight the power failed again. The hallway fell into darkness. She heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the lobby. When she turned the corner, she saw him. Lucien stood by the window, the stormlight casting his reflection nowhere at all. "You've been watching me," he said, his voice almost tender. "That's dangerous." "What are you?" she whispered, barely able to breathe. Lucien smiled faintly, eyes glowing like dying embers. "A mistake that refuses to die." She backed away, the candle trembling in her hand. The shadows around him seemed to bend, folding toward his body like wings. Before she could run, he whispered, "You invited me in, remember?" The windows exploded inward, glass spraying across the room. The wind screamed through the inn, snuffing out her candle. The world went black. When Sheriff Crowley returned the next morning, the inn was silent. The front door hung open, tables overturned, the guest book torn apart. Only room 7 remained untouched. On the wall above the bed, written in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "She's not dead. She's dreaming." The sheriff turned to leave, but something under the bedsheet moved. Heart hammering, he pulled it back. Margaret lay there pale as stone, eyes open and unblinking. She wasn't breathing, yet her lips moved faintly, repeating the same name over and over again. "Lucien, Lucien, Lucien." He stepped back, frozen in horror. Suddenly her eyes rolled upward, glowing faint red, and she sat up in one sharp motion. Her lips curled into a cold smile. "He's awake now," she whispered. The candle on the table flickered once, then died, and the entire inn was swallowed by darkness. The sun never rose properly the next morning. A dim, bruised light hung over Hollow Creek, painting the sky in sickly shades of purple and rust. The fog hadn't lifted. It was thicker now, redder, curling around buildings and fences like something alive. The townsfolk whispered that it carried voices if you listened long enough, that if you stood in it too long, you could hear someone calling your name in a language older than words. Sheriff Crowley didn't believe that, or at least he told himself he didn't. But ever since he'd found Margaret Doyle in that bed, pale, silent, and whispering the name of the man who had vanished into thin air, He couldn't shake the feeling that Hollow Creek had slipped out of the world it used to belong to. By noon, the sheriff had sealed off the inn. Investigation in progress, the taped notice read. But no one dared go near it anyway. The windows were blackened from within, and locals swore they could see shapes moving behind them at night. Father O'Malley tried to bless the property that afternoon. He lasted less than 5 minutes before stumbling back out, clutching his cross, his face white as ash. When asked what happened, all he said was, "It wouldn't let me pray." Crowley drove up to the Barnes house later that day. Ellie's parents sat on the porch, faces hollow from sleeplessness. "You find anything?" her father asked, his voice cracking. Crowley hesitated. He hadn't told anyone about the ring. Ellie's initials carved inside it, left neatly on Lucian Vale's pillow. "Not yet," he lied. But as he drove back down the dirt road, he took the ring from his pocket and turned it over in his hand. The silver was cold, unnaturally cold even under the sun, and when he looked closely, he could swear the metal pulsed faintly, like something breathing. That night, Hollow Creek lost power again. The town fell into darkness, and one by one, the phone lines went dead. People lit candles and gathered together in silence. The wind outside screamed through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of something that wasn't wind at all. Whispers, maybe. Or laughter. No one wanted to admit they heard it. In the inn, Margaret Doyle sat up slowly. Her skin was still pale, her eyes glassy. But she was awake. She moved with a strange grace, her movements too fluid, too calm. She went downstairs, humming softly to herself, the same haunting chant she'd once heard through Lucian's door. In the lobby, she lit a single candle and stood before the broken window, staring into the fog. "You're coming back," she whispered. "Aren't you?" And from the distance, faint but certain, a voice answered, "I never left." 2 miles away, Sheriff Crowley tossed in his bed, unable to sleep. The nightmares had grown worse. He dreamed of Lucian standing at the edge of his bed, eyes glowing red, whispering secrets into his ear. Secrets about Hollow Creek, about a covenant made long before the town even existed. "You can't protect them," the dream Lucian whispered. "You built this place on a grave." Crowley woke with a start, drenched in sweat, his clock blinking 3:33 a.m. A noise came from outside, the faint creak of his front gate. He reached for his gun and stepped out onto the porch. The fog was so thick he could barely see beyond the steps. "Who's there?" he called out. No answer, just that strange, rust-scented air pressing against his lungs. Then, through the mist, he saw a figure. Small. A girl. She was barefoot, her clothes torn. Ellie Barnes. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Ellie?" He ran toward her. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, eyes wide open and shining faintly in the dark. "Help me," she whispered, her voice fragile as glass. "He's waiting for you." Before he could reach her, she turned and vanished into the fog, leaving only a damp handprint on his arm, a handprint that burned like frostbite. By dawn, Crowley had made up his mind. He called for Father O'Malley and Deputy Price. "We're going back to the cave," he said. "I don't care what's down there. We finish this." The priest hesitated, but agreed. "If he's what I think he is," O'Malley said grimly, "we'll need more than guns." He filled a small flask with holy water, tucked his rosary into his coat, and followed the sheriff into the woods. The forest felt wrong. There were no birds, no wind, only silence, and that endless red fog curling around their boots. When they reached the cave, the stench hit them, copper, rot, and something faintly sweet. The altar was still there, but something had changed. The blood was fresh again, glistening wetly in the dim light. Crowley raised his flashlight and his stomach turned. There were more bones now, human bones, dozens of them. And carved into the cave wall above the altar were new words, still bleeding. The blood moon rises. The debt must be paid. Debt? Crowley muttered. What the hell does that mean? O'Malley knelt beside the markings, tracing the symbols with trembling fingers. These aren't just words, he said. They're a seal. An old one. Older than Christianity. This is a summoning. Before Crowley could respond, a sound echoed through the cave. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing against stone. They turned toward the entrance, and there he was. Lucian Vale. His white shirt was stained with red, his bare feet silent on the rock. His eyes glowed faintly like embers beneath the fog. "Sheriff," he said softly. "Father, you shouldn't have come here." Crowley raised his gun. "Where's the girl?" he shouted. Lucien tilted his head. "Which one?" he asked. "The one who's missing? Or the one who isn't yours anymore?" Before they could react, the candles flickered violently, though no one had lit them. The air thickened with heat. O'Malley splashed holy water toward Lucian, shouting words of exorcism. The liquid hit his chest and hissed like acid. Lucian staggered back, clutching his skin as smoke rose from it. For a moment, Crowley thought they had hurt him. But then Lucien looked up, smiling through the pain. "It's been centuries since that burned," he whispered. "You must have strong faith, Father. Hold on to it while you can." The ground shook. Rocks began to fall from the cave ceiling. The light from the flashlight flickered, revealing shapes moving in the shadows. Pale, twisted things crawling along the walls, whispering in voices that weren't human. Crowley fired into the darkness. The bullets echoed, but nothing fell. "We have to go," he shouted. But before they could escape, Lucian's voice filled the cave, low and mournful. "You don't understand," he said. "I didn't bring this. You did." The cave collapsed halfway, forcing them to crawl out into the fog. When they reached the edge of the woods, Crowley turned back, but Lucian was gone. Only the echo of his voice remained. "The blood moon rises." That evening, the entire town gathered at the church. The air was electric with fear. Even those who hadn't gone into the woods could feel it, a pressure in the sky, like a storm that wouldn't break. As the sun sank, the moon rose, swollen and deep crimson. The fog turned scarlet, covering the town like a blanket. People began to scream. Some claimed they saw faces in the mist. Others said they heard their dead relatives calling to them from outside their doors. Inside the church, Margaret Doyle stood quietly at the back, eyes glowing faintly. When Father O'Malley saw her, he froze. "Margaret," he said softly, "you shouldn't be here." She smiled. "He's coming," she said, "and he's not what you think." Then the candles blew out. The church door slammed shut. Outside, something began to move through the fog. Large, slow, deliberate. The stained glass windows trembled in their frames. Sheriff Crowley gripped his revolver, heart hammering. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. Margaret turned to him, her voice cold and calm. "It's not what, Sheriff. It's who." The church bell rang by itself, the sound twisting into a scream as the walls began to shake. And through the fog, a tall figure appeared at the door, smiling, red-eyed, and drenched in moonlight. Lucian Vale had returned. The church erupted into chaos the moment Lucian Vale stepped inside. The heavy wooden doors slammed behind him, rattling on their hinges, and the red fog poured in like liquid fire. Candles flickered and hissed as if the very air rebelled against his presence. His eyes burned brighter than before, not crimson now, but a sickly golden hue, like molten light bleeding through cracks in stone. Father O'Malley raised his cross and shouted the Lord's Prayer, his voice trembling. But Lucian didn't flinch. He only smiled, that same tragic, knowing smile that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow behind it. "Stop this madness," the priest cried. "Whatever you are, you don't belong here." Lucian tilted his head slowly, his shadow stretching impossibly long across the floor. "You think I came here to destroy?" he said softly. "But I came because this town already destroyed itself. His words sent a murmur through the gathered crowd. Mothers clutched their children. Men stepped back, crossing themselves. Sheriff Crowley aimed his revolver straight at Lucian's heart. "You've got 5 seconds to explain that, or I'll put you down like the monster you are." Lucian didn't move. "Do you really believe bullets can kill what your ancestors created?" he whispered. Then, with one slow step forward, the candles went out. The entire church was swallowed in darkness. Screams filled the void. Someone ran for the door and slammed into it. It wouldn't open. Crowley fired blindly into the shadows, but each gunshot only echoed back louder, distorted, until it sounded like laughter. And then, in the faint light from the moon through the stained glass, they saw them. Shapes moving along the walls, pale and crawling, their faces frozen in silent screams. They were the missing. Ellie Barnes, the miners from decades ago, the travelers who had vanished through the years. Their eyes glowed faintly red, their bodies translucent like mist, whispering Lucian's name. When the light finally returned, Lucian was gone. Only his voice remained, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. Hollow Creek must remember. The debt must be paid. That night the fog swallowed the town completely. Power lines failed, radios crackled with static, and every clock stopped at the same time. 12:07 a.m. The red moon loomed enormous above, bathing the streets in blood-colored light. It wasn't just fog anymore, it had weight. It moved. It watched. Sheriff Crowley gathered what remained of his courage and barricaded himself inside the station with Deputy Price and Father O'Malley. The priest had aged 10 years in one night, his hands shaking, his eyes sunken. "It's not a curse," he said, voice barely a whisper. "It's a covenant." Crowley frowned. "Speak plain, Father." O'Malley drew a trembling cross over his chest. "Long before this was Hollow Creek, this land belonged to a settlement called St. Ivan's Hollow, a group of settlers who fled persecution in Europe. They worshipped in secret not God but something older, a being that promised them protection, harvest, and immortality in exchange for blood. The covenant was simple, one life every generation willingly given. When the settlers vanished, the town was built over their graves. We forgot the covenant. He didn't. The sheriff stared at him. "You're saying Lucien Vale is that being?" The priest hesitated. "Not exactly. He's what's left of it, the last fragment bound to its memory." The radio crackled suddenly. A voice, faint, broken by static, came through. "Help! The fog. They're inside." Then a scream, long and inhuman, before the radio went dead again. Deputy Price swore under his breath, pacing the room. "We need to leave town now." But Crowley shook his head. "There's nowhere to go. The roads are gone. You've seen it. The fog's like a wall." By dawn, Hollow Creek was silent. No birds, no traffic, not even the sound of wind. The town had become an island of death floating in red mist. Crowley ventured out with his flashlight, the beam slicing through the fog like a blade through smoke. Houses stood open, doors swinging gently in the still air. Every window he passed reflected not his face but someone else's. Pale, hollow-eyed strangers looking back at him with sorrow. At the edge of Main Street he found the diner. Inside, the walls were covered in blood. Not splattered, painted. Strange spirals and symbols coated every surface, all circling a single phrase scrawled over and over again. "He remembers." And in the center of the floor sat Margaret Doyle, rocking back and forth, humming that same haunting tune. "Margaret," Crowley said quietly, lowering his weapon, "you need to come with me." She looked up at him slowly. Her eyes were no longer human. They were milky, shimmering faintly under the light. "It's too late," she said softly. "He's awake." The blood moon called him home. "What does he want?" Crowley demanded. She smiled faintly, almost lovingly. "To remember what we made him forget." Crowley stepped closer. "And what's that?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. that he used to be one of us. Before he could react, the windows shattered inward, glass flying through the air. The fog poured in like a living thing swirling around Margaret's body. She screamed once and then the scream broke apart into laughter. When the fog cleared, she was gone. Lucian turned, his expression filled not with malice but deep, unbearable sorrow. "You can't kill me," he said. "You already did, 100 generations ago." The sheriff's finger trembled on the trigger. "Why come back now?" "Because the blood moon rose again," Lucian said, "and someone called me home." Before Crowley could ask who, the candles exploded, the church windows shattered, and the sound of hundreds of whispering voices filled the air, the voices of the dead. He covered his ears, but it was inside his head, in his bones. And beneath all of it, one voice stood out, Margaret's, whispering over and over, "He's not here to feed. He's here to remember." The sheriff stumbled back, terrified, as Lucian stepped forward, his shadow merging with the fog. "When the final moon bleeds," Lucian whispered, "you'll see what they did to me, and you'll wish you hadn't forgotten." The bell rang again, loud enough to shatter the night. And when Crowley blinked, Lucienne was gone. Only the fog remained, curling gently through the open doors, whispering like 1,000 lost souls. And above it all, the crimson moon burned brighter, as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. The storm returned that night, as if the heavens themselves were trying to erase Hollow Creek from existence. Rain lashed against the broken windows, thunder rattled the floorboards, and flashes of lightning illuminated the dark corners of the manor like the pulse of a dying heart. Emily sat in the candlelit library, her trembling hands clutching the journal she'd found behind the portrait of Count Vasilis, the same journal that had belonged to her grandmother. Every word on those pages felt like a whisper from the dead. The ink was faded, but the meaning was unmistakable. Her grandmother had written about a deal with the Count, a promise made in desperation. The villagers, starving during the famine of 1890, had turned to Vasilis for help. He gave them food, protection, and prosperity, in exchange for a child every generation. The chosen child would disappear into the forest, never to be seen again. The townspeople had buried the truth, rewriting history to cleanse their guilt. But Hollow Creek had been feeding the curse ever since. Emily's heartbeat echoed through the silent hall as she whispered to herself, "Every generation. That means someone was taken before me." Her mind spun back to the graves she'd seen in the churchyard, each one marked with a year, each separated by roughly 20 years. The last was from 2004, 21 years ago. She shivered. That meant the next offering was overdue, and she was the only newcomer to the town. The candle flickered violently as the room grew colder. Emily looked up. The shadows around her began to twist, bending unnaturally against the walls. A soft whisper floated through the room, followed by the faint sound of dripping water. She turned toward the library door. It was open. She was sure she'd closed it. As she approached, a figure appeared in the corridor, tall, cloaked, and motionless. She froze, unable to breathe. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, she saw his face. It was the same man from the painting, the Count. His pale skin seemed to glow faintly, his eyes reflecting the dim candlelight like twin embers. "You shouldn't have read that," he said softly. His voice wasn't angry, just impossibly calm, as if he were addressing a child who'd broken a rule they could never understand. Emily stumbled backward, clutching the journal. "You're not real. You're dead," she shouted, her voice shaking. The Count stepped closer, his boots silent against the wooden floor. "Dead?" he whispered, smiling faintly. "You mortals use that word so easily. I was never dead, my dear. I was merely waiting for the next promise to be fulfilled." Lightning split the sky again, and for an instant, the entire hallway lit up, revealing dozens of shadowy figures behind him. Their eyes gleamed red, their faces pale and distorted. They were the missing children, or what was left of them. Emily screamed and bolted through the hallway. Her feet pounded against the rotting wood as she sprinted down the stairs, nearly slipping on the wet floor. The front door loomed ahead, half open, the storm raging just beyond it. She could hear footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. She burst through the doorway into the rain, her lungs burning, her body soaked instantly. The wind howled around her, but she kept running, through the overgrown path, past the iron gates, and toward the flickering streetlights of Hollow Creek. Behind her, the manor stood against the storm, dark and alive, its windows glowing faintly red like open wounds. She reached the church, slamming the door shut behind her. The silence inside was suffocating. Dozens of candles flickered on the altar, and in their light she saw Father Marcus kneeling before the crucifix. His eyes were closed, his lips moving in prayer. "Father," Emily cried out, "he's real. The Count, he's in the house. He's coming for me." Father Marcus didn't respond. Slowly he turned his head toward her. His eyes were completely black. "You weren't supposed to see him yet," he said, his voice no longer trembling but deep and resonant. "You weren't supposed to know until the offering was done." Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What are you talking about?" "The deal," he whispered. "Our survival. You were chosen, Emily. The blood must be renewed, or Hollow Creek will vanish into the earth." Before she could react, the church doors flew open and a powerful gust of wind blew out every candle in the room. Darkness swallowed them both. She heard Father Marcus scream, then a sickening crack, followed by silence. When the candles flickered back to life, the Count stood in the center of the aisle, holding Marcus's lifeless body like a puppet. "Faith," he said, looking at Emily, "it can save souls, but it cannot save promises." He dropped the priest's body to the floor. Emily backed away until her spine hit the altar. The Count's gaze softened slightly. "You are not the first to resist," he said, "nor will you be the last. But understand this, I do not take what is not offered. It is your people who bring you to me." Her mind reeled. "You're lying," she spat. "They would never." "Wouldn't they?" he interrupted. "Ask your grandmother." The words hit her like ice. "She's dead." "Perhaps," he said, "but not gone." He stepped closer, his hand rising slowly toward her face. "You carry her blood, her promise, her guilt. You are the final link. End this curse, and I shall leave your kind in peace." Lightning struck again, shattering one of the stained glass windows. Emily grabbed a broken cross from the altar and thrust it forward, her hand trembling. "Stay away." The Count smiled. "Do you even know what that symbol means anymore?" he asked, his voice like a sigh. "Your faith died long before your body will." The candles around them burst simultaneously, sending black smoke swirling through the air. Emily coughed, her vision blurring. When the smoke cleared, the Count was gone, but in his place on the altar lay an old locket. She picked it up with shaking hands. Inside was a photograph of her grandmother, and the Count standing beside her. She dropped it in horror. The photograph was dated 1924, almost 100 years ago. Her legs gave out, and she fell to her knees. The storm outside grew louder, almost like laughter. Somewhere in the distance, a bell began to toll. 12 slow, heavy chimes. Midnight. And then she heard it again, the whisper. Faint at first, then closer. "Emily." She turned toward the sound. In the corner of the church, a dark figure was emerging from the shadows. It wasn't the Count this time. It was a woman, pale and translucent, her eyes glowing faintly blue. Emily's voice cracked. "Grandma?" The spirit smiled sadly. "You shouldn't have come back, child. The blood pact cannot be undone. He's bound to our line forever. I tried to stop him, but love makes fools of us all." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "You made the deal?" "I made it for you," her grandmother whispered. "For your mother, for all of us. But I never realized. He doesn't want the blood. He wants the memory. He feeds on our guilt, our fear. Every generation that forgets, everyone that buries the truth, he grows stronger." The air turned icy again. The candles flickered wildly, and Emily felt a cold breath on her neck. Her grandmother's ghost looked past her and whispered, "He's here." Emily spun around, and the Count stood inches away, his crimson eyes burning brighter than ever. The last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her was his smile. And in that smile she saw something she hadn't before, a reflection of herself. The first thing Emily felt was the cold. It wasn't the kind of cold that touched your skin. It seeped into her bones, deep and relentless. When she opened her eyes, the church was gone. The world around her was nothing but black mist and faint whispers, like being trapped between the breaths of the living and the dead. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy, as if she were submerged in icy water. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Where am I?" "You are where memory sleeps," came the answer. The voice was smooth, echoing from all directions. The Count stepped from the mist, his face illuminated by a faint red glow. "You wanted to escape, Emily, but you can't run from what you are." She struggled to her feet, trembling. "What do you mean?" "You've been told only half the truth," he said, walking slowly around her like a shadow studying its owner. "Your grandmother made a bargain, yes, but the blood she offered wasn't yours. It was mine." Her breath caught. "What?" He stopped and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Centuries ago, I wasn't what you see before you. I was a man, a priest. I believed in salvation more than anyone. When the plague came, I prayed for God to spare my village. I begged him for mercy. But your ancestor, Elara Whitmore, offered me something else, a chance to save them all, through her own forbidden rites." She said she could stop the death, if I let her bind my soul to the blood of her descendants. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. So, you're bound to my family? He nodded slowly. She saved the village that day, but at a cost. I was transformed into something between life and death, cursed to feed on memory, not blood. Every generation that bears Ilara's blood becomes my tether. When one of you dies, the memories pass to me. The pain, the guilt, the fear, they sustain me. Without them, I would fade. You see, Emily, I don't feed on life. I feed on remorse. She stared at him, horrified. So this curse, it's not about blood sacrifice? He smiled faintly. No, it's about remembering what you've done. That's why your grandmother tried to destroy me. But even in death, she could not forget. None of you can. I am the consequence of your bloodline's sins. The mist around them thickened. Shapes began to form. Faces, countless faces, children, villagers, even Father Marcus. Their hollow eyes watched her silently. These are the forgotten, the Count said softly. All those your family tried to erase from history. Hollow Creek was built on their suffering. Emily shook her head, backing away. No, you're twisting it. You're lying. The Count stepped closer, his voice deepening. Am I? You found her journal. You saw the truth written in her own hand. Your grandmother didn't save anyone. She prolonged the curse by feeding me new souls. And now? He reached out his hand. It is your turn to remember. Before she could react, his fingers brushed her forehead, and the world exploded in light. Images flooded her mind, flashing like shards of shattered glass. She saw Ilara performing a ritual beneath a blood-red moon, her hands dripping crimson. She saw the famine, the burning fields, the villagers' desperate faces as they begged for salvation. And she saw her grandmother, standing beside the Count, smiling as a young girl was led into the woods. Emily screamed. The images kept coming, her mother's voice, her grandmother's lies, the buried bodies beneath Hollow Creek. It was too much. Her mind burned with the weight of generations. Stop, she cried. Please, stop. The Count stepped back, his expression unreadable. Now you understand. This place, this curse, it is not mine alone. It is yours. It has always been yours. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Then how do I end it? He tilted his head. By remembering everything and forgiving none of it. What does that mean? She whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked upward, and for the first time she saw pain flicker across his face. I am tired, Emily. Centuries of guilt have rotted this world. I want release as much as you do. But only one of us can leave this place. The mist began to swirl violently, pulling them both toward a crimson vortex that opened in the air like a bleeding wound. The faces screamed as they were drawn into it. Emily could feel the force dragging her backward, her feet slipping. What happens if I fall in? She shouted. You'll forget everything, the Count said. You'll wake up free, as if none of this ever happened. Hollow Creek will vanish from memory, as it always does, but I will remain, trapped, waiting for the next to remember. She stared at him, realization dawning. That's how the curse survives. You erase the truth, and the cycle starts over. He met her gaze. Yes, because mortals cannot bear their own sins. They always choose forgetfulness. The wind howled louder, the vortex widening. Emily's mind raced. If she forgot, the curse would continue. If she remembered, she might never leave. Her grandmother's ghostly words echoed in her mind. He doesn't want blood. He wants memory. Suddenly, she knew what she had to do. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket she'd found in the church. The image inside, her grandmother and the Count, stared back at her. She closed it tightly in her fist. You said you feed on guilt, she said. Then take it all. Before he could stop her, she stepped forward, pressing the locket against his chest. A blinding light erupted, filling the void. The Count screamed, not in pain but in something like awe, as memories poured from Emily's body into his. Generations of sorrow, betrayal, and fear flooded him. His eyes widened, glowing brighter and brighter until they shattered into light. The mist began to fade. The vortex collapsed. The screams ceased. Emily stood alone in silence. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying in the grass outside the ruins of Hollow Creek. The manor was gone. The church, the town, everything had vanished. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees. Birds were singing. It was as if the place had never existed. For a long time she sat there, unsure if she was alive or dreaming. Then she noticed something beside her, the locket. But now, instead of her grandmother and the Count, the photograph inside showed her own face. She stared at it in horror. Her reflection in the metal surface shifted, her eyes glowing faintly red. A whisper brushed her ear, soft and familiar. Memory never dies, Emily. It only changes shape. Her breath caught. She looked down at her hands. They were pale, cold, and trembling. She tried to stand, but the sunlight felt too bright, too sharp. Her shadow stretched long across the ground, and for a fleeting moment, she saw another figure standing within it, the Count, smiling faintly. The birds went silent. The air grew colder again. And deep in the woods where Hollow Creek once stood, a new manor began to rise, stone by stone, from the earth itself. The curse hadn't ended. It had merely found a new keeper. Emily's whisper echoed through the trees, carried by the wind like a forgotten prayer. I remember. Have you ever seen a town where no one bleeds? Where every smile hides a secret and every mirror reflects something that isn't quite you? That was the first line of the anonymous email that arrived in Evelyn's inbox. At first, she thought it was spam, one of those creepy chain letters trying to scare people with cursed stories. But as she scrolled down, the message got weirder. It was short, written in strange formatting, almost poetic. They built the town on silence. They buried the truth under the chapel. Don't stay after midnight. Don't look anyone in the eyes too long. And whatever you do, don't cut yourself. Evelyn was a true crime podcaster. Her show, Forgotten Scars, had started as a hobby in college and had slowly grown to a modest following of thrill seekers. She'd covered stories about haunted highways, missing hikers, and unsolved murders, but nothing like this. When she Googled the name of the town mentioned at the bottom of the email, Dawnbrook, Maine, she found almost nothing. No Wikipedia page, no population data, just a few scattered mentions in old blog archives, and an abandoned Facebook page that hadn't been updated since 2014. The only visible photo showed a foggy street lined with decaying houses and a crooked church steeple. Evelyn forwarded the email to her small team, Liam, her sound engineer, Maya, her co-host and skeptic, and Darren, their cameraman who insisted on filming everything for the docu-series they'd make one day. Subject: New lead, Dawnbrook, Maine. Ever heard of it? Liam replied first. Not on any maps I checked. Creepy as hell. We should go. Maya replied last. Or maybe we don't. This sounds like a setup. Who even sends something like that? But Evelyn's curiosity was stronger than her fear. 2 days later, the team was on the road. The drive north took nearly 9 hours. Dawnbrook wasn't even listed on their GPS, just a stretch of unnamed road between two state highways. They had to rely on printed directions from an obscure blog post titled, Places That Time Forgot. As they entered the region, fog thickened around the car like smoke. Pine trees grew so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground. Every few miles, they'd pass old, leaning houses with boarded windows. Liam joked nervously, Feels like Silent Hill, huh? No one laughed. By sunset, they saw a sign, rusted, barely legible. Welcome to Dawnbrook, where every dawn is a blessing. The letters were faded, as if the town itself had tried to erase them. They drove down a narrow main street lined with old lampposts that hadn't worked in years. Houses stood in perfect stillness. No people, no cars, not even a dog barking. Only the faint hum of the wind moving through the trees. Creepy, but perfect for an episode, Evelyn whispered, lifting her phone to record. They booked a small, run-down inn called the Dawnbrook Rest, which surprisingly answered the phone when Evelyn called earlier that morning. The woman on the line had sounded distant, monotone, like she hadn't spoken to another human in weeks. When they arrived, she was waiting at the counter, an elderly woman with silver hair tied in a bun, her pale skin nearly translucent. "You're the podcasters," she said flatly. "We don't get visitors anymore." Her eyes flicked to the blood-red microphone logo on Evelyn's bag and lingered a second too long. "Rooms are ready. Breakfast at dawn," she added. "Don't go out after midnight. It gets cold." Maya smirked. "Cold? It's Maine. Everything's cold." But Evelyn noticed the woman's hand, stiff, bony, gripping the key so tight her knuckles looked bloodless. That night they unpacked in adjoining rooms. Darren filmed short intros for their channel, dark hallways, creaking floorboards, and the eerie stillness outside the windows. Liam set up microphones to record ambient sound for the podcast. At 11:47 p.m., Evelyn was reviewing notes when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, rhythmic, almost measured, like someone pacing. She peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Then she noticed something strange. A faint shadow under the door across from theirs, as if someone was standing perfectly still just beyond it. Maya whispered behind her, "You see it too?" Evelyn nodded. "Maybe one of the guests?" "There are no other guests," Maya replied. "The woman said we're the only ones." The footsteps stopped. For nearly a minute, silence filled the air, until a whisper drifted through the hall, barely audible but unmistakable. "Don't bleed." Evelyn's breath caught. "Did you hear that?" Liam opened the door suddenly, flashlight in hand, but the hallway was empty. No one there. Only a single thing remained, a dark stain on the carpet. At first it looked like dried blood, but when Darren bent down with the camera light, it shimmered faintly. Not red, but black, thick, sticky, almost tar-like. "Jesus," he muttered. "What the hell is that?" Maya, ever the skeptic, said, "Probably oil, or mold." Evelyn stared at it. The smell was metallic, sharp, too familiar to mistake. "That's blood," she whispered. "Or it used to be." The next morning, they decided to explore the town. Dawnbrook looked frozen in time. Every building seemed abandoned, yet not destroyed, as if the residents had simply vanished overnight. Stores still had faded price tags on the windows. A barbershop chair sat mid-spin, newspapers inside a mailbox dated April 12, 1999. Liam walked beside her, recording with his phone. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi, and no sign of life, just fog and emptiness. How does a place like this exist? Maya found the church mentioned in the email, a tall stone structure with a broken bell tower. The front doors were chained shut, but the stained glass windows were mostly intact, depicting biblical scenes, except one that made them all stop. It showed a pale figure standing among people with no faces. In its hand it held a chalice, filled not with wine, but blood. Underneath, carved into the stone, "Only the blessed may drink." Creepy religious symbolism, Maya said. Classic small-town cult vibes. Evelyn stared longer. Or a warning. They continued exploring until late afternoon. That's when Darren noticed something odd. Every mirror in town, whether in stores or broken cars, had been shattered. Not cracked, shattered, as if someone had smashed them intentionally. Maybe the locals were superstitious, Liam offered. Or hiding from something, Evelyn murmured. They returned to the inn at dusk. The old woman greeted them at the door, expression unchanged. You shouldn't wander too long, she said softly. The mist isn't kind after dark. Can you tell us what happened here? Evelyn asked. Why did everyone leave? The woman hesitated, then sighed. They didn't leave, dear. They changed. Maya frowned. Changed how? The woman's lips quivered, a ghost of emotion flashing across her face. You'll see soon enough. That night they reviewed their recordings. Darren froze mid-edit. Guys, come look at this. He replayed a clip from that morning, the church window. When he zoomed in, they all saw it, a figure standing in the reflection behind them. It was tall, slender, dressed in gray. No face, just a smooth, pale surface where one should be. They had never seen anyone behind them while filming. Liam's voice cracked. That wasn't there before, right? No, Darren said. And look, it's not casting a shadow. Before anyone could speak, the lights flickered. The old inn's power hummed irregularly, lights dimming, then brightening again. Then they heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Heavy. Evelyn whispered. Same as last night. They turned toward the door. A soft knock. 3 times. Maya, trying to sound brave, called out, Who is it? Silence. Then from the other side of the door, a voice, hollow and low. You've been seen. The doorknob began to turn slowly. Liam grabbed a chair and wedged it under the handle. Hell no, he muttered. They waited. Breath held. The knob twisted again, then stopped. The air grew colder, their breath visible in the dim light. Evelyn's phone buzzed suddenly with a notification. It was from an unknown number. One message. Don't lock it out. You can't stop the hunger. The lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. They scrambled for flashlights. The moment the beam flicked on, Evelyn screamed. The window, which had been shut minutes ago, was wide open. Curtains fluttered wildly. And on the opposite wall, written in something dark and dripping, were the words, They don't bleed. They feed. Maya backed away. What the hell is happening? Liam's voice trembled. We need to leave, now. But before they could reach the door, they heard the innkeeper's voice from the hallway. Calm, almost gentle. It's too late, dears. You've already been invited in. The door creaked open on its own, and standing there in the flickering beam of the flashlight was the woman, her eyes pitch black, her mouth trembling as if struggling to contain a scream. But it wasn't a scream that came out. It was a hiss, long, deep, and hungry. Her teeth glinted in the light, not sharp like fangs, razor thin like shards of glass. And then she whispered, Welcome to Dawnbrook. The podcasters arrive in the mysterious town of Dawnbrook, where no one bleeds, mirrors are shattered, and something ancient watches them from the mist. As night falls, the truth begins to surface, and the locals may not be human at all. For a moment, no one moved. The old woman stood framed in the doorway, her shadow stretching impossibly long across the creaking floorboards. The beam from Darren's flashlight trembled as he tried to steady his shaking hands. The light caught her eyes, black pools reflecting nothing, and for a fleeting second, Evelyn swore she saw something behind them, something shifting like liquid darkness. The woman's face twitched as if her skin didn't quite fit her bones. Her lips curved into an eerie smile that revealed rows of jagged, translucent teeth, glimmering wetly in the light. Evelyn took a single step backward, her heart hammering so loudly she thought it might burst through her ribs. Ma'am, she stammered, her voice quivering. We didn't mean to intrude. We'll leave now. The woman tilted her head at an unnatural angle as though trying to understand what Evelyn had said. Leave? She echoed in a voice that seemed to vibrate through the air, thin and sharp like a violin string pulled too tight. There's nowhere to leave to. The fog doesn't let anyone go. You're already part of it now. The words fell heavy in the silence that followed. Darren dropped the flashlight, and in that instant of darkness, something moved. Fast, silent, and close. When he retrieved the light, the old woman was gone. The hallway beyond was empty. Only the faint scent of iron lingered in the air, as if someone had spilled rust or old blood. "Where the hell did she go?" Liam whispered. He pressed his ear to the doorframe. Nothing. Only the deep hum of wind crawling through the cracks of the old building. Maya, pale and trembling, muttered, "We're not staying here another minute. I don't care what story this is supposed to be." But Evelyn couldn't move. Her instinct told her to run, but something else, something deeper, urged her to stay. That phrase the woman had whispered, "You've already been invited in," kept echoing in her skull. Invited in. What did that mean? She turned to the others. "Pack your stuff. We'll get to the car and drive until we find signal." They grabbed their bags, fumbling with zippers and cords, each second stretching into eternity. The air felt thick now, heavier than before, as though the entire inn were breathing, walls groaning softly, the floorboards pulsing faintly under their feet. When they reached the front lobby, the desk bell was ringing by itself, a slow, rhythmic ding, 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 that made Darren's skin crawl. The main door was ajar, letting in the thick gray mist that had returned. But when Liam pushed it open fully, his stomach dropped. The car, their black SUV, was still there, but it was wrong. Every window was shattered inward, the metal warped and streaked with dark stains that looked disturbingly like handprints. The fog curled around the vehicle, hiding half of it in opaque white. "Someone trashed it," Maya said, her voice cracking. "Someone's trying to keep us here." Evelyn forced herself forward, her boots crunching on broken glass as she approached the car. The driver's door hung open. Inside, on the seat, lay something that made her freeze in place. A small piece of folded paper, perfectly white against the dark interior. She reached in and unfolded it slowly. "The blessed do not bleed. The outsiders do." Her breath caught. The handwriting was familiar. It matched the anonymous email that had started everything. She turned, showing it to the others. Darren's camera was already rolling, capturing every tremor in her hands. "You think the person who sent that email is here?" he asked. "Or maybe," Liam muttered, scanning the fog, "they're watching." The fog thickened, swallowing the end of the street. For a brief moment, Evelyn thought she saw figures moving in the mist, tall, thin silhouettes standing motionless in the distance. But when she blinked, they were gone. "Let's go," she said sharply. "Back inside. We'll barricade until daylight." They returned to the inn, pushing furniture against the doors and windows. Darren set up cameras at each entrance, muttering to himself that if this was going to be their last night, at least the footage would make sense of it later. Liam found a few candles in a dusty drawer and lit them, their flickering glow throwing long, wavering shadows across the room. Hours passed in uneasy silence. No one dared to speak. Every so often they'd hear faint scratching sounds from the walls, or the distant echo of something moving through the mist outside. The air inside grew colder, dry, almost sterile. At some point, Maya whispered, "Do you smell that?" Evelyn sniffed the air. There was a faint sweetness, like flowers left to rot in water. It grew stronger by the minute, seeping from the cracks in the walls. The smell made her dizzy, as if it were draining the air of oxygen. Then came the whispering. Soft at first, like a radio tuned just off frequency. 100 voices murmuring at once, overlapping and unintelligible, yet with a rhythm that almost sounded like breathing. The sound came from behind the walls. Liam pressed his ear to the wood and immediately recoiled. "They're inside the walls," he gasped. "Something's moving in there." Evelyn's heart raced. She leaned close, listening. Beneath the layers of whispering, one voice rose above the others, a deep, rasping tone that seemed to vibrate directly in her chest. "Drink, and be saved." She stumbled back, trembling. Maya gripped her arm. "What did you hear?" Evelyn opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, one of the windows shattered inward with a violent crash. The candle flames blew out. Darren's camera swung toward the noise, the night vision kicking on automatically. Through the green haze of the lens, they saw something standing outside. It wasn't human. The figure was tall and lean, its limbs too long, its skin pale as marble. Its eyes glowed faintly, soft, shimmering silver that reflected no light. And its mouth was wrong, stretching far wider than any human jaw could, filled with rows of needle-like teeth. It pressed its hand against the glassless window frame. Long fingers with blackened nails scraped the wood. Then it smiled, an unnatural, twitching smile that made Evelyn's blood run cold. "Don't move," Darren whispered. The creature's head tilted, as if it could hear him. Then, suddenly, it darted away, vanishing into the fog. For several seconds, no one breathed. Then Maya spoke, her voice trembling. "We're not dealing with a ghost, are we?" "No," Evelyn whispered. "Something worse." By dawn, they hadn't slept. The fog began to fade slightly, revealing more of the town through the cracked windows. They decided to move. Staying in the inn felt like waiting to die. The streets outside were silent again, the air unnaturally still. They followed the cracked road toward the church, which loomed larger now in the daylight. Its stone walls were covered in moss, but something new caught their eye. Fresh scratches etched into the door, forming strange symbols. Darren zoomed in with his camera. "Looks like Latin," he said. "Or something close." Maya, flipping through her phone for translation apps that couldn't connect without service, muttered, "I recognize one of them. It's the alchemical symbol for blood." Evelyn ran her fingers along one of the carvings. It was shallow, as though made recently. "Someone's been here," she said. They managed to force the chain off the doors and stepped inside. The air inside the church was colder, damper. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward the altar where a massive cross hung upside down. At its base stood a silver chalice stained dark inside. "Jesus Christ," Liam muttered. What kind of church was this? As they explored, Darren noticed faint movement above them. When he turned the camera upward, the light caught dozens of shapes, human-shaped figures hanging upside down from the rafters. Not dead, sleeping. Their skin was pale, waxy. Their chests rose and fell faintly, as if they were breathing slow, shallow breaths. Every one of them had a small scar on their neck, 2 perfect punctures. Maya covered her mouth, choking back a scream. "They're alive." Evelyn's voice broke. Or something close. She stepped closer to the altar and found another note lying beside the chalice. The paper was damp and old, but the ink was fresh. "The blessed await their thirst. The outsiders bring the offering. The blood must return home." Before she could react, one of the hanging bodies twitched. Then another. The air filled with the sound of faint, wet breathing. One by one, their eyes opened, black as oil, unblinking. The group backed away slowly, but the movement triggered the sleepers. Their heads turned all at once toward the noise, and then they began to drop. Bodies fell from the rafters, hitting the pews with dull, fleshy thuds. But when they hit the ground, they didn't stay down. They moved, jerking upright with inhuman grace. Dozens of them, all turning toward the intruders. Liam shouted, "Run!" They bolted for the door, Darren clutching the camera against his chest. The sound of hissing followed them, a chorus of hungry, ragged breaths. One of the creatures lunged, its claws grazing Darren's back as he stumbled through the doorway. Evelyn slammed the heavy doors shut and wrapped the broken chain around the handles. The pounding began instantly, rattling the frame. The group sprinted down the road, their lungs burning, hearts pounding. They didn't stop until they reached the far edge of town, where a small bridge led over a stream that looked black under the sunlight. But when they tried to cross, something invisible stopped them. Evelyn reached out, pressing her hand forward, and felt an invisible wall of cold air. It wasn't solid, but her body refused to move through it. Liam tried next, only to recoil as his arm began to numb, the skin paling instantly. "It's like a barrier," Maya gasped. "We can't leave." Darren turned, panting. "Then what do we do?" Evelyn looked back toward the fog-covered town. The church bell began to toll, slow and deliberate, though no one was near it. Each chime echoed across the valley, heavy and haunting. Then came the voices again, hundreds of them this time, rising from every direction. "Drink and be saved. Drink and be whole." The fog swirled, thickening into shapes, humanoid silhouettes approaching from the mist, dozens of them, moving in perfect silence. Evelyn whispered, "They're not letting us leave alive." And from somewhere deep within the fog, a familiar voice answered, soft, almost motherly. "Who said you were alive to begin with?" Evelyn froze. That voice, it was her own. Trapped in the cursed town of Dawnbrook, the group discovers a horrifying church filled with sleeping blessed. When they try to escape, they find an invisible barrier blocking their way, and realize the voices in the fog may be mimicking their own. The sound of her own voice echoing through the fog shattered Evelyn's grip on reality. For a moment, she couldn't tell if she'd actually spoken or if someone, had spoken through her. The others stood frozen, their faces ghostly pale in the murky light. The words hung in the mist like a curse, cold and heavy. Liam broke first. "We have to move," he hissed, clutching his backpack strap like it was a lifeline. "If that barrier's real, there's got to be another way out. Maybe through the forest." Darren raised his camera again, even though his hands were trembling so hard the footage would be useless. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. The voices stopped. They had. The world had gone dead quiet, so quiet that Evelyn could hear her own heart pounding in her ears. Then, faintly, something else. A dripping sound. Slow. Consistent. Like water falling from a ceiling. She turned toward the sound. It was coming from the edge of the bridge and from underneath. Against her better judgment, she leaned over the railing. Beneath the bridge, a narrow stream trickled sluggishly through black mud. But the droplets weren't clear. They were dark red, thick and glistening in the dim light. They fell from the underside of the bridge itself, one after another, staining the water. Liam stepped up beside her, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Please tell me that's not—" "It's blood," Evelyn said quietly. "It's coming from the bridge." The group exchanged uneasy glances. The stream below didn't flow outward. It looped back toward the town, curling like a vein feeding back into a heart. It was as though Dawnbrook was alive, pulsing, feeding on itself. They turned away and began walking along the road, away from the bridge and deeper into the forest that bordered the town. The trees were tall and skeletal, their branches twisting together like the fingers of corpses. As they moved, the fog seemed to thicken again, but not randomly. It shifted and rolled like it was watching them, following their movement. After half an hour, they reached what looked like a clearing. In the center stood a small cabin, its roof collapsed and walls leaning at odd angles. A broken sign near the door read, "Dawnbrook Forestry Station." They forced the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit them immediately. Stale air, mold, and something else underneath, faint but metallic. Blood again. Always blood. Inside, the cabin looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Papers covered the floor, most of them too faded to read. Darren began filming while Maya picked up a few sheets. "These are reports," she said, squinting. "Forest management, animal control. Wait," her voice faltered. "There's something weird here." She handed Evelyn one of the documents. The paper was brittle, yellowed, dated 1982. The header read, "Town Health and Resource Survey, Dawnbrook, ME." Evelyn read aloud the key section. Observation: blood donations and transfusions within Dawnbrook remain at 0% rate. No reported injuries, illnesses, or deaths requiring medical attention for 46 years. Subject population exhibits unusual pallor and slow heartbeat. Recommend further biological study. Data suggests altered human physiology. She looked up, her skin crawling. No deaths, no blood, for 46 years. Liam shook his head. That's impossible. Nobody lives without getting hurt, without bleeding. Evelyn's voice was hollow. Unless they don't bleed. The room fell silent again. Only the faint hum of the wind through the cracks broke it. Then Darren found something near the fireplace. A rusted metal box half buried under debris. He pried it open with a screwdriver and froze. Inside were old photographs, dozens of them, black and white and faded with time. He spread them out on the floor. The images showed the town, the church, the inn, the streets, but filled with people. Men, women, and children, all smiling unnaturally, all with the same blank, glassy eyes. In every photo, the same man stood somewhere in the background, tall, wearing a gray coat, his face always turned slightly away from the camera. Maya whispered, "That's him. The figure from the church window. The one watching us." Evelyn picked up one of the photos, her hands trembling. The back had a note scribbled in neat handwriting. The Overseer of Dawnbrook, 1967. Her pulse quickened. "This isn't just some random town," she said softly. "It's an experiment." Darren frowned. "By who?" But before anyone could answer, the radio on the old desk crackled to life. The speaker hissed, then a distorted voice whispered through, "They know you're here." Maya stumbled back. It's on? There's no power." Evelyn grabbed the radio, twisting the dial. "Who is this? Who are you?" The voice distorted further, like multiple voices speaking through one throat. "We were them. They were us. You were chosen." And then the static cut off. The silence that followed was unbearable. Liam whispered, "Evelyn, what if they're not alive the way we are? What if this whole town's caught in some kind of cycle, feeding off whoever shows up?" Evelyn didn't answer. She stared at the last photograph, one showing the church with the congregation outside, hands clasped as if in prayer. At the center of the image, the tall man in gray was staring directly at the camera. For the first time, his face was visible, and it was Evelyn's. Her breath caught. She dropped the photo, backing away. No, that's not." Maya grabbed her shoulders. "Evelyn, what is it?" "It's me," she whispered. "He has my face." Before anyone could respond, a loud bang came from outside. The sound of wood snapping, followed by the crunch of footsteps. Darren rushed to the window and froze. "They found us," he breathed. Shapes moved between the trees, tall, thin figures with silver eyes glowing faintly through the fog. They moved silently, their limbs bending too fluidly, too smoothly. Liam grabbed a chair and wedged it under the door handle. "We're trapped." The first impact came seconds later, a violent slam that rattled the entire cabin. Dust fell from the ceiling. Another hit followed, then another, rhythmic and relentless. Evelyn's mind raced. The bridge, the blood, the church, the voices. It all led back to one thing. Dawnbrook wasn't a town. It was a system, a living mechanism feeding on what came from outside. They were the outsiders. The offering. She turned to the others. "The church," she said. The message said the truths buried under the chapel. That's where this started. Liam shook his head violently. "You want to go back there?" "If we don't, we're dead anyway," she replied. "Maybe there's something down there. A way to stop it." The door cracked under another blow. Darren slung his camera bag over his shoulder. "Fine," he said. "But if we're going to die, it's going to be on film." They burst through the back window and into the fog, sprinting through the forest toward the faint outline of the church steeple. The shapes followed, gliding rather than running, their whispering voices weaving through the trees like wind. By the time they reached the churchyard, dawn had already begun to fade again, the light dimming unnaturally fast. The sun didn't rise properly in Dawnbrook. It only pretended to. The church doors still hung chained, but the pounding from inside had stopped. Everything was eerily still. Evelyn forced the chain off and pushed the doors open. The pews were empty now. The bodies that had once hung from the rafters were gone. The chalice still sat on the altar, but something new lay beside it. A long silver knife engraved with strange runes. Next to it, written on the altar cloth in dark ink, was a single phrase. "The blood remembers its owner." Maya whispered, "It's a ritual. They're using blood to bind people here." Evelyn lifted the knife. It felt unnaturally cold, humming faintly in her grip, as if alive. She turned toward the altar's base. The floorboards there looked different, newer. She and Liam pried them open with the knife's edge, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. The air that rose from below was damp and foul, smelling of decay. Without a word, they descended. The steps led to a massive underground chamber, walls of stone lined with candles that burned without smoke. At the center stood an altar of black marble, and above it, suspended by rusted chains, was a massive glass container filled with dark liquid. "Blood," Darren whispered. "It's feeding something." Beneath the glass chamber, veins of red light spread across the floor, pulsing like roots, each one leading upward through the ceiling toward the town. Evelyn suddenly understood. The blood of Dawnbrook wasn't just symbolic, it was literal. The town fed from this reservoir, and the people above, the blessed, were its vessels. Then she saw movement inside the glass. Something shifted, something humanoid. A pale face pressed against the glass from the inside. Eyes snapped open, silver and cold. The glass began to crack. "Run!" Liam shouted. The container exploded, showering the chamber in blood. The candles flickered out, and from the darkness rose a shape, tall, formless at first, then solidifying into the figure in gray. Its face shifted between forms, the innkeeper, the townsfolk, Evelyn herself, flickering like broken film. Evelyn backed away, the silver knife trembling in her hand. The figure spoke, its voice echoing from every direction. "You carried our name here. You are the vessel reborn. Dawnbrook remembers its children." "I'm not one of you," she whispered. The creature smiled. "You were. You will be again." It lunged. Evelyn raised the knife, slashing wildly. The blade met flesh, and for the first time, blood spilled, thick and black, splattering across the stone. The creature screamed, a sound so piercing it shattered the nearest candles. The chamber began to tremble, the walls pulsing like veins bursting open. Liam grabbed Evelyn's arm. "We have to go." They ran for the stairs as the ceiling began to collapse, the sound of roaring filling their ears. The last thing Evelyn saw before they reached the surface was the creature's eyes, silver, burning with fury, fixed on her. They burst through the church doors into the cold daylight, gasping for air. The ground shook beneath them, cracks spreading across the street. The fog tore apart like ripping fabric. For the first time since they'd arrived, sunlight pierced through the clouds. But the relief was short-lived. The town's buildings began to crumble, their walls bleeding thick black fluid. The mist screamed, thousands of voices howling in agony. And then, through the chaos, a new sound. Darren's camera still rolling, replaying the footage automatically. The screen flickered with static, then showed the first night in the inn, the hallway outside their rooms. Only now, there were 5 shadows, instead of 4. And the fifth had been behind Evelyn the whole time. The group discovers Dawnbrook's horrifying secret, a living blood network beneath the church that sustains the town's cursed blessed. In destroying it, they awaken something older and more powerful, and realize one of them was never just a visitor. The wind howled like a living thing outside the cabin as Mark slammed the door shut. The snow had thickened, turning the forest into a silent graveyard of white and shadow. The others gathered around the fireplace: Alex, Sarah, Ethan, and Lily, each of them shaking, drenched, and terrified. The smell of old wood smoke and damp clothes filled the air, but beneath it, something else lingered. A faint metallic odor, iron, thick and unmistakable. Blood. Mark moved to the corner of the room where a rusty old lantern hung from a nail. He lit it with trembling hands, and the weak flame illuminated the faces of his friends, haunted, pale, and broken by fear. Sarah kept glancing toward the window as if expecting something to be staring back. "Did anyone else smell that?" she whispered. Ethan turned toward her. "What?" "That smell. It's coming from the walls." Alex frowned and stepped closer to one of the wooden panels. "There's no way." He stopped mid-sentence. The wall was damp. A dark, reddish streak ran down between the boards. He touched it hesitantly, then recoiled. "It's blood," he said hoarsely. The group froze. Even the fire seemed to shrink, hissing as if it didn't want to be there anymore. Lily began to cry softly, her hands shaking. "We should have never come here," she whispered. "I told you this place felt wrong. Ever since we found that grave in the woods." Mark's voice was low, urgent. "No one's going outside. Whatever that thing is, it's hunting us. We stay inside. We stay alive." But Sarah was staring at something behind him. Her face had gone pale, her lips trembling. "Mark," she said quietly, "look at the wall behind you." He turned. There, etched faintly into the old wooden planks, were carvings, symbols, ancient, circular markings filled with lines and dots. Beneath them, words scrawled in dried blood. "The one beneath will rise again." The group stepped back in unison. "Is this a joke?" Ethan asked weakly, but no one answered. The air was too heavy for laughter. Outside, the wind stopped. Everything went silent, so silent that they could hear their own breathing. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the door. Sarah screamed. "Don't open it," Mark warned. But Ethan, panicking, grabbed a poker from the fireplace and crept toward the door. "Maybe it's someone who can help us," he said, voice trembling. He pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing. He slowly unlatched the lock. "Ethan, don't!" Alex yelled, but it was too late. The door swung open, and there was no one there, only snow swirling into the cabin like white smoke. Then something hit Ethan from above. A black shape dropped from the roof. Long limbs, a gaunt face, eyes glowing crimson like embers. The creature moved with impossible speed. It slammed Ethan into the floor, its teeth sinking into his neck before anyone could react. Blood sprayed across the walls. Sarah screamed again. Mark grabbed the axe, and Alex threw a log at the monster. But it was useless. The creature lifted its head, blood dripping from its mouth, and for the first time they saw it clearly under the flickering lantern light. It was human, or had been once. Its skin was stretched tight over bones, veins dark as tar. Its mouth was too wide, filled with serrated teeth, and its eyes were familiar. "God," Mark whispered. "It's Trevor." The name hit them like a hammer. Trevor, their friend who disappeared 2 nights ago when they first entered the forest. "Trevor, what happened to you?" Lily cried. The creature hissed, tilting its head as if struggling to remember. For a moment, something flickered in its eyes. Recognition. Then rage. It lunged again, sending the lantern crashing to the ground. The flame exploded into darkness. In the chaos, Mark swung the axe wildly. He felt it hit flesh, heard a guttural cry, and then the creature vanished into the night. When they relit the fire, Ethan was gone. Blood led from the doorway into the woods, disappearing into the storm. No one spoke for several minutes. The only sound was the fire crackling, fighting to stay alive. Sarah finally broke the silence. "It's feeding," she whispered. "Trevor, that thing, it's feeding on us." Alex sat down hard on the floor, staring blankly at the blood on his hands. Why us? Why now? Mark was silent, staring at the carvings on the wall again. The symbols seemed older than anything he'd ever seen. He could feel them, like they were pulsing faintly. Then he noticed something else. An old weathered door at the back of the cabin. It looked like a basement entrance. Don't, Lily said, seeing where he was looking. We're not going down there. But Mark's curiosity burned hotter than his fear. This place was built for a reason, he said. Whatever's happening started here. We need to know what's beneath us. After a long silence, they agreed. They moved as one, the floor creaking beneath their feet. The door groaned when Mark pulled it open and a gust of air blew out, cold, damp, and foul, like a tomb that had been sealed for centuries. The staircase descended into darkness. They used their phones as flashlights. The walls were stone, slick with moisture. Strange sigils had been carved into them too, spiraling and looping in patterns that made their heads ache to look at. At the bottom, they found a small chamber. In the center stood an altar made of black stone, and on it lay an open book, its pages made of stretched, dried skin. Sarah gagged. Oh my God. Mark stepped closer. The symbols on the book matched those carved into the cabin walls. The language was old, but a few words were English. Scrawled in jagged letters across one page were the words, "The bloodline must be kept." Alex turned to the others. Bloodline? What bloodline? Suddenly, Sarah gasped. Her flashlight had caught something on the far wall. Portraits. Old framed photos, their glass fogged with dust. She wiped one clean and froze. It was a picture of 5 people. A man and woman in 19th century clothing, with 3 children. But the children's faces, they were identical to them. Sarah screamed and dropped the frame. That's us, she cried. It's us. Mark stared at the photo, horror dawning in his eyes. No, that's impossible. But the resemblance was undeniable. Every detail, every line. It wasn't just similar. It was exact. Alex backed away, shaking his head. What the hell is this place? What's happening to us? Before anyone could answer, the air changed. The temperature dropped suddenly. The shadows on the wall began to move, twisting and stretching into long, unnatural shapes. Then came the whispering. Dozens of voices, murmuring from the walls, from the floor, from inside their own heads. The bloodline must be kept. The one beneath will rise. Lily screamed and covered her ears, but it was no use. The voices were inside her, and then the ground began to shake. The altar cracked open, and from the fissure beneath it came a glow, deep red, like molten blood. The whispers rose into screams. Mark tried to pull Sarah away, but she was staring into the light, transfixed. It's calling me, she whispered. Sarah, no, he yelled, but she stepped forward, reaching toward the altar, and then she vanished. The light surged up, swallowing her whole. When it faded, the basement was silent again. Only the faint smell of blood and smoke remained. Mark and Alex stood frozen, staring at the empty spot where she had been. Lily was crying, whispering over and over, She's gone. She's gone. Then came the sound of footsteps behind them. Slow, wet, heavy. They turned toward the stairs and saw Sarah, standing there. But her eyes were no longer human. They glowed the same deep blood red as the light from the altar. For a long moment no one moved. The air in the basement felt heavier than stone, pressing down on them until every breath hurt. Sarah stood perfectly still at the foot of the stairs, her red eyes glowing faintly in the dark, like 2 embers smoldering in an unlit fire. Her hair hung damp over her face and her lips were moving soundlessly, as though she were whispering to someone, or something, that none of them could hear. Sarah. Mark's voice was barely a whisper. What happened to you? She didn't answer at first. Instead, she tilted her head, watching him with an unnatural stillness. Then, in a low, broken voice that was both hers and not hers, she said, "I saw it. I saw everything. We were never supposed to leave." Alex took a cautious step backward, pulling Lily with him. "We need to get out of here," he said. "Now." But Sarah moved suddenly, fast, impossibly fast, appearing in front of them before the sound of her last step had even faded. Her face was inches from Alex's, her pupils narrow as a blade's edge. "You don't understand," she hissed. "We're not outsiders here. We're home." Mark's hand tightened around the axe handle. "That thing you touched, the altar, it changed you." She smiled then, but it wasn't her smile anymore. It was cold, ancient, and knowing. "No, Mark," she whispered. "It didn't change me. It woke me up." Before anyone could react, the basement door at the top of the stairs slammed shut on its own. The lights from their phones flickered wildly. The sound of whispering returned, louder now, swirling like wind through the stone chamber. Mark swung the axe toward the sound, yelling over the noise, "What do you want from us?" The voices seemed to merge into one deep, inhuman growl. "The bloodline must be kept." The ground shuddered violently. Cracks spidered across the walls and black liquid began seeping out. Thick, oily blood that pooled at their feet. The altar split in two, revealing a coffin made of the same dark stone. The smell of rot and earth filled the room. Sarah turned toward it slowly, her eyes flickering with recognition. "It's time," she said softly. "Time for what?" Lily screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, please, stop this." But Sarah wasn't listening. She walked toward the coffin like she was in a trance. Mark lunged forward, grabbing her arm, but the moment he touched her, she turned her head sharply, bearing a mouthful of jagged, blood-stained teeth. She pushed him away with unnatural strength, sending him crashing into the wall. "Sarah, please," he coughed. "You're not yourself." She looked back at him with a trace of sadness. "I was never myself," she whispered. "None of us were." The coffin began to open with a deep groan, dust billowing into the air. Inside lay a figure, long and thin, wrapped in decayed linen. Its skin was gray, its nails black and sharp. As the lid fell aside, its eyes opened, glowing faintly red like Sarah's. Alex fell to his knees, whispering, "Oh God, it's real, it's all real." The creature sat up slowly, bones cracking as it moved. Then, in a voice that was deep, echoing, and ancient, it spoke. "Children, you've come home." The words crawled through their ears, cold and alive. Mark, trembling, raised the axe again. "Stay back." The vampire looked at him and smiled, revealing long yellow fangs. "You cannot kill what you are," it said. "You are my blood." "What are you talking about?" Mark shouted. Sarah turned to him again, tears streaming down her pale face. "He's right," she said quietly. "That picture upstairs, it wasn't just a coincidence. We are them, the same faces, the same souls, the same blood." Mark's breath caught. "That's impossible." The vampire rose from its coffin, towering over them, its shadow stretching across the walls like a spreading stain. "It is not impossible. You were born again to continue what was broken. My children were cursed to wander, to forget what they were until the blood called them home." Alex shook his head violently. "We're not your children. You're a monster." The vampire's smile didn't falter. "You call it monstrosity. I call it eternity." It moved faster than thought. One moment it stood across the room. The next, it was in front of Alex, its cold hand clamped around his throat. Alex gasped and clawed at its fingers, but the vampire only watched him with pity. "You should not have come back," it said, and snapped his neck like a twig. Lily screamed, the sound raw and piercing. She stumbled backward, grabbing Mark's arm. "We have to leave," she cried. Mark dragged her toward the stairs, but the door was still locked tight. He slammed against it again and again until his shoulder burned. Below them, the vampire was moving slowly, deliberately, like a predator savoring its hunt. "Run if you must," it said. "The forest will lead you back to me. It always does." Mark finally burst through the door. He and Lily scrambled out of the basement and into the cabin. The wind outside howled through the broken windows, and snow swirled like white ash. They ran, out the door, into the forest, breathless and half-blind. Behind them, the cabin groaned as though alive. They ran until their lungs felt like they would tear open. The trees loomed tall and endless. Every direction looked the same. Every sound seemed to come from behind them. "Mark," Lily gasped, clutching her side. "I can't." Something moved in the shadows ahead. A figure stepped out from between the trees. It was Ethan. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. Blood stained his shirt, but there were no wounds. "You shouldn't have left," he said in a soft, unnatural tone. "He doesn't like when the bloodline runs." Mark froze. "Ethan, what did he do to you?" Ethan smiled faintly. "He didn't do anything. He just reminded me who I am." Lily screamed as Ethan stepped closer, his eyes glowing red. Mark swung the axe with everything he had, the blade catching Ethan's shoulder. But there was no blood, only a hiss and a burst of cold air. Ethan's body fell apart like smoke, vanishing into the night. Mark grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her forward. "We keep moving," he said. "Don't stop." They stumbled through the trees for what felt like hours. The snow grew thicker, the darkness deeper. Then, through the blur of white, they saw lights. Yellow, warm, human. A gas station. They burst through the door, startling the lone attendant behind the counter. "Please," Mark gasped. "Call the police. There's something in the woods." The man blinked at them, confused. "Whoa, slow down. You two look like you've been through hell." He reached for the phone, but Lily had gone silent. She was staring at something behind the counter. A wall of old newspaper clippings framed under glass. Mark followed her gaze and froze. The headline read, "5 friends missing near Blackwood Forest, 1973. Below it were black and white photos. He looked closer, and his stomach turned to ice. It was them. The same faces, the same names. Mark, Sarah, Alex, Ethan, Lily. The attendant noticed their horror. "Yeah," he said softly. "That old story still gives folks the creeps. They say those kids were never found. Some locals claim they still see them sometimes, out near the old cabin." He stopped when he noticed Mark's trembling hand pointing toward the wall. "That picture," Mark whispered. "That's us." The attendant laughed nervously. "You're kidding, right? You think you look like those kids?" But Lily was already backing away, shaking her head violently. "Mark," she whispered, her voice breaking, "it's happening again." The fluorescent lights flickered. The air turned cold. The glass of the framed photo cracked slowly, as if under invisible pressure. The attendant's voice trembled. "What the hell's going on?" Mark turned to Lily, but she wasn't there anymore. Only a trail of blood led out the door into the snow, and in the glass reflection, behind his own terrified face, Mark saw Sarah, standing close behind him, her red eyes glowing brighter than ever. Her whisper brushed his ear like cold breath. "You never left, Mark. You never will." The lights went out. The gas station fell silent, and somewhere in the distance, deep in the woods of Blackwood, a single ancient voice echoed beneath the earth, soft, satisfied, eternal. The bloodline is kept. Have you ever wondered why some towns vanish from maps overnight? That was the first question I heard when I arrived in Ashwood. The Uber driver didn't even make eye contact when he said it. His voice was low, gravelly, as though the words themselves were dangerous. He dropped me off at the edge of town, refused to drive any further, and sped away like the asphalt behind him was cursed. Ashwood wasn't supposed to exist anymore. According to official records, a chemical plant explosion in 1998 rendered it uninhabitable. But the light still glimmered faintly through the fog that rolled across the valley. I had come because I didn't believe in ghost towns, not the kind that still hummed with electricity. My name is Ethan Cole, freelance journalist, occasional paranormal investigator, and a man whose curiosity has always been stronger than his common sense. 3 weeks ago, I received an anonymous email. If you want a real story, come to Ashwood. People here don't die. They just change. Attached was a grainy photo of a group of pale faces staring out of a diner window at night. Eyes glinting with a red that could have been from reflection, or something far worse. The first night in Ashwood felt wrong in ways I couldn't name. The air was heavier, the silence deeper. The streetlights flickered unevenly, casting long, nervous shadows across cracked sidewalks. The town looked almost normal from a distance. Gas station, old library, church steeple in the distance. But every window I passed was dark, curtains drawn, like the residents were hiding from something outside or inside. I checked into the Hemlock Inn, the only building with its lights on. The receptionist was an elderly woman whose skin looked thin enough to see the blue veins beneath. She smiled when I asked about the town, but her eyes never did. People don't come to Ashwood, she whispered, sliding a tarnished brass key across the counter. They return. When I asked her what she meant, she only turned away and muttered, "You'll see." The room smelled faintly of rust and old flowers. I unpacked my camera, laptop, and recorder, trying to ignore the distant hum outside my window. It wasn't the sound of traffic or wind. It was a low, rhythmic vibration, almost like breathing. Around midnight, I decided to explore. The moon hung low and swollen, lighting the cracked pavement in silver. The town square was empty except for the Ashwood Diner, its neon sign flickering erratically. Against every instinct, I went inside. The place looked frozen in time. The jukebox still played faintly, but no one had touched it. Half-eaten plates of food sat on tables, now crusted over with dust. I should have turned back. But then I saw her, sitting alone in the corner booth, staring directly at me. She looked maybe 25, but there was something ageless in her eyes, something that made the hairs on my neck rise. Her skin was impossibly pale, her lips too red. And when she smiled, it wasn't with warmth, it was with hunger. "You're not from here," she said softly. Her voice was melodic, almost hypnotic. "Just visiting," I managed. "I'm a journalist, writing about the town." "Writing about the dead?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. The air grew colder around us. The neon lights buzzed like angry insects. "No," I said, forcing a smile. "Just stories, urban legends." She leaned forward, and for a moment, her pupils expanded until they nearly filled her eyes. "Every legend starts with truth, Ethan." I froze. I hadn't told her my name. "How do you—" She stood, gliding toward me so smoothly it didn't seem human. Her shadow didn't move quite right on the floor. It lagged behind her, bending the wrong way. Before I could speak again, she placed a cold hand on mine. Her touch was soft but chilling, like frost forming over skin. "Leave before sundown tomorrow," she whispered, "or you'll never leave at all." Then she was gone. One blink, and the booth was empty again. Only the faint scent of iron lingered in the air. I stumbled out of the diner, my pulse hammering. The fog outside was thicker now, swirling unnaturally around my feet. I could hear faint whispers in it, like voices calling my name from very far away. Back at the inn, I replayed the recording on my phone. The moment I spoke to her, the audio filled with a faint, static hum. Then, after her final words, a deep male voice whispered something that turned my stomach cold. "He's one of us now." But I was alone in that diner. Completely alone. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red glints watching me from the corner of my room. Once, I thought I heard footsteps in the hall. When I got up and opened the door, no one was there. but the carpet was wet, as if someone had just walked through rain that didn't exist. By morning, I was ready to leave. I packed my things, grabbed my car keys, and rushed downstairs. But the old woman at the desk was gone. The front door wouldn't open. It wasn't locked. It just wouldn't open, as if the wood itself resisted me. I ran to the window and tried to push it open, but outside wasn't right. The street was there, but the light was off. Everything was colorless, drained, silent, like a photograph of the world instead of the real thing. That's when I noticed it, the shadow on the wall opposite me. It was shaped like me, but it wasn't doing what I was doing. While I stood frozen, it tilted its head. Then it smiled. I stumbled backward, crashing into the nightstand. My phone buzzed. One new message. No number. Just text. You stayed past dawn. Now it begins. The lights flickered, then went out completely. When I woke again, it was night, but not the same night. Outside, the fog pulsed like something alive. The entire town glowed faintly red beneath the mist, and in the distance I could hear faint singing. It wasn't human. Drawn by something I couldn't explain, I followed the sound to the church I'd seen before, the one with the crooked steeple. Its doors were open, candles burning along the aisles, though no wind should have lit them. At the altar stood a group of people dressed in black, their heads bowed. The woman from the diner was among them, her eyes closed, her lips moving in a language older than time. And behind the altar, hanging upside down like an offering, was a man. His eyes were open, his throat torn. Blood trickled down his arms and into a bowl carved from stone. The woman turned to me slowly, her lips stained crimson. "Ethan," she said softly. "You should have left when you could." Before I could react, the entire congregation lifted their heads. Dozens of eyes glowed red in the candlelight. The man hanging above the altar began to twitch, his body convulsing violently. His mouth opened in a silent scream as his eyes rolled back white. The woman smiled. "He's waking." And then, his eyes snapped open, and they were my eyes. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. The congregation hissed in unison, the sound like tearing metal. My vision blurred, and I felt a sharp sting on my neck, like ice and fire at once. The last thing I saw before collapsing was the woman leaning close, whispering, "Welcome home, Ethan." When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. At first I thought it was still night, but the light seeping through the window wasn't moonlight. It was dimmer, colder, tinted with an otherworldly grayness that seemed to drain the color out of everything it touched. My head throbbed, my throat burned, and when I touched the side of my neck, I felt two small punctures that throbbed beneath my fingertips like tiny heartbeats. The room wasn't my motel room anymore. The wallpaper was gone, replaced by stone walls that wept moisture. I sat up slowly, realizing I was lying on an old metal bed frame, its sheets stained brown with something that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Chains dangled from the walls. A single lantern flickered in the corner. The air smelled of rust and decay. Footsteps echoed from somewhere beyond the door. A familiar voice hummed an old tune. Something eerily beautiful, but soaked in melancholy. When the door creaked open, the woman from the diner stepped in, dressed in black velvet that shimmered in the low light. "Good evening, Ethan," she said, smiling faintly. "You've been asleep for quite some time." I tried to speak, but my throat was so dry that only a rasp came out. Where am I?" "In Ashwood," she said simply. "But not the one you knew." I looked at her, heart pounding. "What did you do to me?" She tilted her head slightly, studying me with those deep, red-shadowed eyes. "I gave you what you came searching for," she said softly. "The truth." I tried to stand, but my legs trembled. "The truth about what?" She stepped closer, her hand brushing my cheek with unnatural tenderness. "About who you are." I pulled back. "I don't even know you." Her smile deepened, and for the first time, I saw something ancient behind it, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered. "You knew me long before you were born." The words made no sense, and yet a chill ran down my spine. She turned toward the door. "Come. It's time you see Ashwood for what it really is." When I stepped outside the room, my breath caught. The place I had thought was a basement opened into a vast underground cathedral, its ceiling lost in darkness, supported by black stone pillars carved with faces that seemed to move when I looked away. Dozens of candles burned in hollow skulls, their wax dripping like blood. People, no, things, moved silently through the shadows, their eyes glinting faintly in the light. Everywhere I looked, I saw signs of something ancient, symbols etched into the floor, murals painted with dark red pigment. A massive circular mirror at the far end reflected not the room, but another place entirely, a forest at night, bathed in silver fog. "This is where we live," the woman said, her voice almost reverent. "The real Ashwood, the one beneath the illusion your world sees." I turned toward her, my voice shaking. "You keep saying we. What are you?" She smiled again, and for the first time her fangs glinted in the candlelight. "I am called Selene," she said. "We are what your kind used to worship, then learned to fear. We are the blood that remembers." "Vampires," I whispered. The word hung in the air like an accusation, and every creature in the cathedral seemed to pause for a moment, as though they'd heard it. Selene didn't flinch. "A crude name. But yes." I stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. "You're lying. Vampires don't exist. This is some kind of cult." Before I could finish, she moved. One moment she was standing yards away, the next she was inches from me, her cold breath brushing my ear. "Then how do you explain the hunger in your veins?" I froze. My heart, if it was still mine, began to race. The burning in my throat grew sharper, deeper. My vision sharpened unnaturally, the candlelight blooming into detail I shouldn't have been able to see. I could hear the faint drip of water from somewhere far off, and the heartbeats of every creature around me. Selene smiled as my breathing grew ragged. "You feel it, don't you? The thirst?" I shook my head violently. No, I'm not." She pressed her finger to my lips. "You are." Then she gestured toward the mirror at the end of the cathedral. "Go ahead, look." I turned slowly, dread rising in my chest. The reflection showed the hall, the candles, the pillars, but not me. Where I stood, there was only empty space. A sickening realization hit me. My reflection was gone. I stumbled backward, gasping. "What did you do to me?" Selene's expression softened, almost pitying. "You were dying, Ethan. The moment you entered this town, your fate was sealed. The blood of Ashwood chose you long before I found you." "I don't understand," I shouted, my voice echoing through the dark hall. "Why me?" "Because you're not the first," she said quietly. "You're the last." Before I could demand answers, the sound of bells echoed through the cavern, deep, resonant, and urgent. The other creatures in the hall stirred, whispering to one another in that strange, ancient tongue. Selene's face hardened. "They found us," she said. "Who?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The hunters," she hissed. Suddenly, the air filled with the sound of footsteps, heavy, synchronized, approaching fast. The cathedral doors burst open, and figures in black coats stormed in, carrying silver weapons that gleamed like lightning in the dark. Selene grabbed my wrist. "Run." I didn't have time to think. The next few minutes blurred into chaos, shouting, the crackle of burning torches, the hiss of smoke grenades flooding the air. I saw vampires disintegrate in bursts of ash, heard screams that tore through the air like shredded metal. Selene pulled me through a narrow passage behind the altar, dragging me through a tunnel carved from rock. We emerged in the forest beyond town beneath a sky that looked wrong, stars too bright, moon too close. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. "Who were they?" I demanded. "The Order of St. Verena," she said between breaths. "Hunters. They've been trying to destroy us for centuries. They think if they burn Ashwood, they can end the bloodline." "And they're right," I said. "You're monsters." She turned on me, eyes blazing. "We were human once, until your kind made us what we are." I stared at her, stunned. "What are you talking about?" Celine took a step closer, the fury in her expression fading into something sorrowful. "Do you know what Ashwood used to be, Ethan? It wasn't a town. It was a sanctuary, a place where the first infected came to hide when the church hunted them like animals. They weren't evil. They were sick. The thirst was a curse placed upon them by a priest who tried to play God." Her voice trembled as though she were remembering something centuries old. "They tried to cure it, but the cure became the blood that bound them to eternity. And now, every few generations, the blood chooses someone new to carry the memory." My stomach twisted. "You mean—" "Yes." Her gaze locked onto mine. "You were chosen." Before I could respond, a silver bolt tore through the trees and buried itself in her shoulder. She screamed, stumbling back. I turned to see a tall man in a long coat emerging from the shadows, his face pale and scarred. He carried a crossbow etched with runes that glowed faintly blue. "Step away from it," he said coldly, eyes fixed on Celine. "She's not—" I began, but he cut me off. "You don't know what she is, boy. Look at her eyes." Celine's breathing was ragged, the silver burning through her skin like acid. She looked at me, pain flickering behind her expression. "Ethan, don't listen to him. He's one of the ones who made us." The man loaded another bolt. "She's lying." The two of them stared at each other across the clearing, predator and hunter, both centuries old. And me, caught between them, blood pounding in my ears. "Ethan," Celine whispered, "you have to choose." The man raised his weapon. "Move aside. Now." I didn't. Something deep inside me, something primal, rose to the surface. My teeth ached, my vision blurred red, and a roar built in my chest. I didn't understand what was happening, but instinct took over. When the hunter fired, I moved faster than I thought possible. I caught the bolt midair. My hand burned where it touched the silver, but I didn't care. The man's eyes widened. Celine's voice trembled. "It's begun." And for the first time I saw my reflection in her eyes, not the man I was, but something else entirely. Something ancient, something hungry. For the first time in my life I could hear blood. Every heartbeat in the forest thudded through the earth like distant thunder. I could sense the warmth pulsing inside the hunter's veins, smell the iron beneath his skin. The night air was alive, thick with scents, sounds, and something else I couldn't name. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. The man's crossbow trembled slightly in his hand as he stared at me, his expression shifting from focus to something close to horror. "You shouldn't be able to do that," he muttered. "It's too soon." Celine staggered beside me, still clutching her wounded shoulder, the silver burning faintly through her flesh. "Run," she whispered, her voice urgent. But I couldn't move. My body refused. Something inside me, a dark, primal instinct, was rooting itself deeper, whispering, "Don't run. Feed." I shook my head violently, trying to silence the voice, but it only grew louder. The scent of blood in the air was maddening. My teeth ached, my stomach twisted with hunger, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might tear into the hunter where he stood. Celine grabbed my face suddenly, forcing my gaze to hers. Her crimson eyes glowed like embers. "Fight it," she hissed. "Don't let the hunger take you. Not yet." The hunter raised his weapon again. "Get away from him, witch." Before I could react, he fired another bolt. This time, Celine didn't dodge. The silver arrow buried itself in her chest. She collapsed with a strangled gasp, black veins spreading from the wound. Something inside me snapped. A roar tore through my throat, raw, inhuman, filled with a rage that didn't belong to me. I lunged. The hunter barely had time to aim before I slammed into him, sending his weapon flying. My hand closed around his throat, lifting him from the ground like he weighed nothing. His eyes bulged and he gasped out a prayer that died on his tongue. "Ethan!" Celine choked weakly from the ground. "Stop!" But I couldn't. The smell of his blood filled my senses, drowning out her voice. My vision tunneled, every pulse in his neck calling to me like a drumbeat. My teeth elongated without pain, and before I realized what I was doing, I sank them deep into his flesh. The taste was indescribable. Heat, fire, life itself. Every drop that hit my tongue filled me with a strength that felt infinite. My body healed, my mind cleared, and yet something precious slipped away. When I came back to myself, the man was a lifeless husk in my arms. His eyes stared blankly at the sky. I stumbled back, horrified, my hands slick with blood. "What have I done?" I whispered. Celine, still on the ground, watched me with a strange mixture of sorrow and pride. "You did what you were made to do." I shook my head violently. "No, I didn't want this." She coughed, the sound wet and painful. "None of us did." The forest around us had gone deathly still. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. I fell to my knees beside her, unsure whether to help or run. "Pull it out," she rasped, clutching the silver bolt buried in her chest. I hesitated. "Now," she screamed. I gripped the shaft and yanked. She let out a cry that could have shattered glass, collapsing into the dirt. Her wound hissed, black smoke rising as the silver burned out. I watched in disbelief as her skin slowly knitted itself back together. Moments later, she sat up, pale and shaking. "We have to go," she whispered. "More hunters will come." "Not until you tell me what's happening to me," I demanded. She looked at me for a long time before answering. "You're becoming one of us, Ethan. The blood is binding to your soul. Once it finishes, there's no going back." I clenched my fists. "There has to be a cure." She laughed softly, a broken, almost human sound. "That's what they all said. Every century, someone comes searching for a cure. Every century, the blood finds a way to keep itself alive." We began walking through the forest, moonlight cutting through the branches in thin, silvery blades. My body still trembled with the hunger I'd just fed. Every rustle of leaves, every shift of shadow made my nerves flare like sparks. After what felt like hours, we reached a clearing. In the center stood a crumbling stone house covered in ivy, its windows shattered, its door hanging crooked. "This was once the Ashwood Chapel," Celine said quietly. "Long before the town was built above it, long before the curse." Inside, the chapel smelled of mildew and thyme. Dust hung in the air like fog. At the far end stood an altar, its surface covered in carvings, strange looping symbols that seemed to twist when I wasn't looking directly at them. Celine traced one with her finger. "This was where it began," she said. "The priest who cursed us, Father Verdun, performed the first ritual here. He thought he was purifying the blood of the sick. Instead, he opened a door that should have stayed shut." "A door to what?" I asked. "To hunger," she whispered. "The blood we carry isn't just a disease. It's a living thing, a consciousness. It remembers every life it's taken, every drop it's consumed, and now it remembers you." Her words chilled me to the bone. "You said the blood chooses people. Why me?" She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "Because it needed someone strong enough to break the cycle, or to begin it again." Before I could respond, a voice echoed from behind us. "So it's true." We both turned. Standing in the doorway was an old man with a silver crucifix around his neck and a revolver in his hand. His face was lined with years of violence, his eyes weary but sharp. "I followed the trail of corpses," he said grimly. "Didn't expect to find you among them, Celine." Celine's eyes narrowed. "Gabriel." "You know him?" I asked. She nodded slowly. He's the last of the original hunters, the one who created the order. Gabriel cocked his revolver. And the one who ended it, because I realized too late what we'd done. He glanced at me, studying me like a specimen. You must be the journalist, the Blood's newest puppet. I took a step forward, bristling. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does, he said. That's how it spreads. He pointed his gun at Celine. She's lying to you. She always has. Celine sneered. You don't know what you're talking about, old man. Oh, I do, he said softly. Because you were the first. The words hit like a thunderclap. Celine's face went pale. That's not true, she whispered. Gabriel's voice hardened. Tell him, Celine. Tell him what you did to this town. I looked at her, my stomach knotting. What is he talking about? Celine's silence said more than words ever could. Gabriel took a step closer, lowering his weapon slightly. Ashwood didn't die because of a curse, boy. It died because she made it happen. She was the priest's daughter, the one who offered her blood to fuel the ritual. She didn't save them. She bound them. Every soul in this valley is chained to her blood. I turned to her, my heart hammering. Is it true? Celine's eyes glistened, not with anger this time, but with guilt. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said softly. I tried to save them. By making them monsters? Gabriel barked. I was 17, she screamed, her voice cracking. He was going to burn them alive. I thought if I gave him my blood, it would heal them. I didn't know what it would become. The air in the chapel grew colder. The candles flickered violently. The symbols on the altar began to glow faintly red. Gabriel stepped back, muttering a prayer under his breath. She's waking it again. What do you mean? I asked. The blood, he said. It's alive, and she's calling to it. Celine's eyes went wide with panic. No, I'm not. Before she could finish, the floor beneath us trembled. Cracks spidered across the stone, and a low rumble echoed through the chapel. The air thickened with the metallic scent of blood. Then, from the cracks in the floor, crimson liquid began to seep upward, slowly at first, then faster until the room was awash in a pulsing red glow. The symbols on the walls blazed brighter, and a voice, not human, not earthly, filled the air. You cannot escape me, child of Ashwood. You carry my hunger. Celine screamed, clutching her head. Gabriel grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the door. Run now. But before we could move, the blood surged upward, coalescing into a shape, vague, humanoid, shifting like smoke. Its eyes burned white, and its mouth was a void. The voice echoed again, deeper now, vibrating through my bones. Ethan Cole, you are my vessel. I froze, unable to move as the crimson mist spiraled toward me. It wrapped around my body, seeping into my skin like fire. Every nerve ignited with pain. My heartbeat vanished, replaced by the rhythm of something ancient and inhuman. Celine reached for me, tears streaming down her pale face. Fight it, Ethan. Please, fight it. But I couldn't. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was the blood figure splitting open, revealing countless faces screaming inside its form. Faces of everyone who had ever lived and died in Ashwood. And then, their voices spoke as one. Welcome home, my child. The following morning was painted gray, as if the sky itself refused to look down on Hollow Creek. The sun struggled through a blanket of thick clouds, and the mist hung heavy like an unspoken warning. The town square was nearly empty, save for a few people sweeping their porches or lighting candles for someone who'd gone missing overnight. Every door had a small cross nailed to it now. Every window was shut tight, even in the day. The only sound was the creak of the church bell rope swaying gently in the wind, though no one had pulled it. Evelyn, pale and sleepless, sat in her small kitchen with a cup of untouched coffee. The phone rang once that morning, a call from Dr. Hale, saying nothing except, "We need to talk. Meet me at the church after sundown." Then the line went dead, She tried calling back, but there was no answer. By late afternoon, she could no longer sit still. She walked to the church, her boots crunching the gravel road, her heart thudding against her ribs like a warning drum. The church door was unlocked. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. The candles were all melted into puddles of wax, and the wooden pews glistened faintly, as if they'd been freshly polished, though she could smell no oil, only iron. Her steps echoed as she moved toward the altar. Then she saw it, faint scratch marks on the floorboards, leading behind the altar's base. She knelt and felt along the seams of the wood, a hidden latch. Her breath caught as she pried it open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. "Evelyn," came a voice from below, soft, urgent, and unmistakable. "Dr. Hale." She hesitated, clutching her flashlight, then stepped down. The stairs were stone, slick with moisture. The deeper she went, the colder it became, until her breath came out in visible clouds. The walls seemed to pulse faintly with the reflection of her light. When she reached the bottom, she froze. It wasn't a cellar. It was a cavern, a massive underground space stretching beyond her light's reach. Dozens, maybe hundreds of bones were scattered across the floor. Not buried, not placed. Dropped. Drained. Evelyn lifted her light higher and saw figures carved into the walls, elongated bodies with sharp teeth, wings like shadows. Ancient, crude drawings of things that looked human but weren't. "Do you see now?" Dr. Hale whispered from behind her. He stood at the edge of the light, face pale, eyes glassy. This town was built on their graveyard. Evelyn swallowed hard. "What are you talking about?" "They called it Hollow Creek because the earth was hollow beneath it, a feeding pit for the old blood," Hale said, voice trembling with both awe and fear. "I found old town records. The settlers didn't build the church to worship. They built it to seal this place." Her stomach turned. Seal it from what? Before he could answer, the air shifted. A faint, wet, dragging sound echoed from the darkness ahead. Then another. Then dozens. From the shadows, shapes began to move, thin, pale arms crawling out from the piles of bones. The bodies that followed were skeletal but fast, their movements jerky, unnatural. Their eyes glowed faintly red in the flashlight's beam. They weren't ghosts. They weren't entirely human either. Their mouths opened, revealing rows of jagged fangs, dripping black fluid. Hale stepped back, voice cracking. They were sleeping. The storms must have awakened them. One of the creatures lunged. Hale screamed as it sank its teeth into his neck, dragging him down. Evelyn turned to run, but another hand shot out from the darkness, clawing at her leg. She kicked it free, stumbled up the stairs, and slammed the hatch shut, trembling so violently she could barely breathe. The sound of clawing followed, faint at first, then louder, scraping wood and stone. She backed away, panting. Then the church bell began to toll. Dong, dong, dong. It echoed across the town, though no one was pulling it. The whole building seemed to shake. Candles blew out. From outside, faint screams began. Far away at first, then closer. Evelyn bolted out the front doors and into the street. The fog had thickened again, swallowing the town. In the distance, she could see silhouettes moving, staggering, jerking, then dropping as something pulled them into the mist. The air smelled of rot and rain. A figure appeared through the haze. Lucas, clutching his chest, eyes wide. "They're everywhere," he gasped. "They came from under the ground." She grabbed his arm. "We have to get out of town." But before she could finish, a tall figure stepped from the mist. Not one of the skeletal creatures. This one moved differently. Smooth, graceful. Its clothes were torn but old-fashioned, as if from another century. Its skin was white as moonlight, its eyes like liquid silver. Evelyn froze. The vampire smiled. "Running won't help, Doctor. This town belongs to us now." She raised her flashlight, and the beam caught something around his neck, a silver chain. Hanging from it was a small key, identical to the one she'd found in the burnt house weeks ago. The vampire tilted his head. You've been quite the curious one. The others failed to stop us, but you... His smile widened, sharp and cold. You might make an excellent beginning. Lucas aimed his gun and fired. The bullet tore through the air, and the vampire caught it effortlessly, staring at it with mild amusement. Then, faster than thought, he was in front of them. His hand closed around Lucas's throat. Evelyn screamed as the vampire lifted him like a rag doll and bit deep into his neck. Blood streamed down. The heartbeat grew louder with every second, pulsing through the air like a drumbeat from beneath the earth. Deep, ancient, and alive. Evelyn staggered backward, clutching the silver key so tightly it cut into her palm. The crater before her began to tremble. Dust and fragments of stone shifted as if something immense were stirring beneath. A fissure split open with a crack like thunder, and a rush of cold, wet air spilled upward. The smell of earth, decay, and blood. She stumbled toward her car, but the engine refused to start. The dashboard lights flickered and died. Every sound in the world seemed to fall away. No wind, no birds, only that terrible rhythm beneath her feet. Thump, thump, thump. Then, from the depths of the crater, a voice rose, not with words but with intent. It wasn't spoken aloud, yet it filled her skull, vibrating through her bones. Come home. Evelyn froze, trembling. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. It wasn't the vampire's voice, it was her mother's. The sky above Hollow Creek began to change color, bleeding from gray to crimson. Clouds swirled into a spiral over the town's center, and lightning flashed without thunder. She took a step back, but the ground buckled beneath her. And before she could scream, she fell. The earth swallowed her whole. When she came to, she was lying on a smooth stone floor. Her head throbbed, and her flashlight was shattered beside her. Only the faint glow of torches lit the cavern now. She recognized the place. It was the same underground pit beneath the church, but far larger, deeper, and more ancient than she'd realized. The air was thick with moisture and the faint metallic scent of blood. In front of her stood the vampire, the same one who had attacked her and killed Lucas. But now he wasn't alone. Behind him, stretching into the darkness, were dozens of others. Men, women, even children, all deathly pale, dressed in old clothing, silent as statues. Their eyes shimmered faintly in the torchlight. The lead vampire smiled faintly, his voice calm, almost gentle. You've come back, Evelyn. She backed away, shaking her head. Back? I don't even know what this place is. He stepped closer. You do. You just don't remember. Her heart pounded. Stay away from me. I can't, he said softly, because you are one of us. The words hit her harder than any blow. She shook her head violently. That's a lie. He gestured toward the walls, and for the first time, she noticed the carvings. Massive murals etched into stone painted with dried blood. They told a story. A woman with bright eyes and a silver key standing beside a vampire with silver eyes. Together, they watched over a sleeping horde beneath a church. That woman, Evelyn whispered. She looks like me. She was you, the vampire replied. Centuries ago. You were our queen, the guardian of the old blood. The settlers captured you, sealed us beneath this church, and erased your memory. But your soul cannot die, Evelyn. It reincarnates, always finding its way back here. She stumbled backward, her hands trembling. No. I was born in Boston. I grew up in a home built on our ruins, he interrupted, stepping closer. Your family line was created to protect the seal. That's why you dreamed of this place before you ever came here. That's why you could hear us. The blood in your veins remembers what your mind cannot. Evelyn's head spun. Images flickered in her mind. Nightmares she'd had as a child, of underground tunnels, of voices calling her name in the dark. She thought they were dreams, but now they surged back with terrifying clarity. The vampire extended a pale hand toward her. The seal is breaking. The world has forgotten balance. Come with me and you can remember everything. Or, his eyes turned silver bright, you can run, and let the old blood devour what's left of this world. The earth shuddered again, louder this time. Cracks split across the cavern walls and streams of black-red fluid seeped through like veins bursting open. The others began to stir, whispering in 1,000 voices at once. Evelyn clutched the key tighter. "What does this open?" she demanded. He smiled. "The door between what you were and what you've become." The words made no sense until she looked down. A massive stone slab rested in the center of the chamber, etched with strange runes and a circular hole in the middle, perfectly shaped for the key she held. Her hand shook as she approached it. Part of her screamed not to run, to escape. But another part, a deeper, older instinct, pushed her forward. The vampires watched in silence. As she slid the key into the slot, the chamber fell utterly silent. No whispers, no movement. Even the dripping stopped. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then the slab began to move. It rose slowly, stone grinding against stone, revealing a pit of swirling black liquid beneath, thicker than water, darker than ink. The air filled with a low hum, almost like a chant. The lead vampire bowed his head. "Welcome home, my queen." Evelyn stumbled backward. The liquid began to rise, not spilling, but climbing, reaching upward like living smoke. Faces formed within it, screaming, whispering, pleading. And among them she saw her own reflection, pale, eyes glowing faintly red. "No," she whispered. "No, I'm not like you." The vampire's expression softened. "You already are." He reached into his coat and withdrew something small and wrapped in cloth. When he unwrapped it, Evelyn's breath caught. It was her mother's locket. Inside was a photograph. A woman who looked almost exactly like Evelyn, standing beside the same silver-eyed vampire. "She made a promise," he said, "that when her blood returned she would finish what was started." Evelyn stared at the locket, at the key, at the rising pit of living darkness. The whispers grew louder, chanting her name now. The air pulsed with power, something vast and ancient. She could feel it inside her veins, awakening. And then, somewhere within her, she felt her heart skip a beat, replaced by something colder, slower. She looked at her hands. The veins beneath her skin had turned black. The vampire stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Do you understand now? The seal didn't keep us imprisoned. It kept you asleep." The realization hit her like lightning. The seal wasn't meant to keep vampires from rising. It was meant to keep her from remembering who she was. Evelyn screamed, grabbing the key and wrenching it free. The sound echoed like thunder. The black liquid shrieked, recoiling. The vampires stumbled backward as light, brilliant white, blinding, burst from the pit. The earth quaked violently. The entire cavern began to collapse. Evelyn ran as stone rained down around her. The vampire shouted her name, not in anger but in fear. She reached the surface just as the ground behind her split apart. The town of Hollow Creek imploded, dragging the church's remains, the houses, everything into the earth. She fell to her knees, gasping as the light consumed it all. And then silence. Nothing remained. No fog, no blood, no screams, just scorched earth and dawn breaking over the horizon. Evelyn looked at her hands. The black veins were gone. Her heart beat again, steady. The key lay beside her, cracked and glowing faintly. She picked it up, whispering, "It's over." But from far behind her, in the woods beyond the ruins, came a sound, faint at first, then clearer. A slow, deliberate thump, then another. She turned slowly. Through the trees, a figure watched her. Pale skin, silver eyes, faint smile. The vampire. He was still alive. He lifted a hand, not in threat, but in acknowledgement. "You can't destroy what you are, Evelyn. he said softly. You can only awaken it. And with that, he vanished into the mist, leaving her alone beneath the blood-red sunrise. Evelyn stared at the horizon for a long time, clutching the broken key. She didn't know whether she had saved the world or doomed it. But deep inside, she knew one truth with absolute certainty. The blood beneath Hollow Creek wasn't gone. It was waiting, and it was hers.